Thank you. Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee. My name is Councillor Bridges. I'm Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews of topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you'll be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. And for those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn your microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Some housekeeping rules before we go on to the main agenda. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one does sound, please follow the officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be placed on silent or switched off, and we also have residents' feedback forms in this meeting and also a link underneath the broadcast. With that said, we start with apologies for absence, please.
Thank you. Apologies from Councillor Smallwood, and Councillor Cawthorne is kindly substituting.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to you, Councillor Cawthorne. Item 2 is declaration of interest in matters coming before this meeting. Are there any? I can see no indications. Item 3 is to receive the minutes of the previous meeting. Can we agree those as correct? Thank you very much. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in Part 1. There are no Part 2 items. Which brings us on to Item 5, the review of homelessness and the customer journey, witness session 2, pages 1 to 12. And good evening to our witnesses this evening. We have Benjamin, who is running slightly late, and Caris from Trinity. And with us we also have Dan Kennedy, who will be introducing the presentation. Good evening, Dan, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of set the scene really, and to build on sort of previous sort of updates to this committee. So obviously this is part of the review that we've given the experience and perspective of local authorities and some of the challenges that we face around homelessness and meeting that particular need, which includes, as we've mentioned, a change in the market in terms of a particular reduction in the supply of private rented accommodation, and importantly, as part of that, the accommodation that is available is increasingly becoming unaffordable because of rent increases. But also as well, that leads to more pressure on the social housing sector as well. I think the other important context is that there are quite a number of residents who find themselves in the homelessness or situation or threat with homelessness who are non-priority needs. So generally speaking, and this is a broad generalisation, tends to be single people. And therefore the sort of benefit not working, the benefit level to which they're entitled limits their ability to access shared rooms, and increasingly that's not affordable. So they're kind of trapped or find themselves in a very difficult situation where they can't get statutory help from the local authority, and so therefore we, as part of our approach in the borough, we work very closely with the voluntary sector, which includes Caris and the team from Trinity Single Homeless Project, but also Thames Reach as well as two partners that we've invited along for discussion as witnesses really. So I think if we could sort of move on to sort of Trinity, and I won't speak for Caris, but Caris will give a quick overview of what Trinity does, and they've been a long-standing partner in the borough and a valued partner of the local authority and do some great work. So rather than me perhaps steal Caris' thunder, I will hand over the mic to Caris, who will walk you through what Trinity does, some of the achievements, but also some of the challenges, and in particular how those challenges can affect the customer experience and the journey to resolving homelessness.
Hi everyone, my name's Caris. I'm the Director of Services at Trinity. So we provide 231 supported bed spaces in the Hillingdon Borough. We also have a unit of 41 unsupported accommodation, which is long-term housing. We house 7 families in the borough with support, and we've supported over 200 families fleeing war over the last 3 years. We also have a reconnection service which provides floating support to those that need tenancy sustainment and various other support needs, and the referrals come through the local authority. So, as Dan said, we work very closely together. We have a 33-bed direct access rough sleeper hostel. So the council have 10 bed spaces that are nominated, and most of our referrals for our supported accommodation comes from the local authority. So we've faced a lot of challenges recently. Something that is a huge impact is the LHA rates that are on offer. This impacts positive move on considerably. What we're finding now is we charge enhanced housing benefit rates, the higher rate, because you have support and tenancy sustainment, and it's actually cheaper for people to stay with us rather than move on into the private rented sector, which is shocking. So we are becoming quite stagnant in flow in our projects because there is no affordable move-on accommodation. This can have a huge impact on the service we're offering because people come independent, they're ready to move on, but there is nowhere for them to go, so you'll find that people will start to digress back into old behaviours. There are offers of accommodation outside of the borough, but when someone has been brought up in Hillingdon or their network is here, their support, it's very hard to move somebody on from the borough that they're accustomed to. I think another issue that we have at the moment is the amount of families that we have and single homeless in hotels. That's putting a huge pressure on our organisation and I'm sure for the local authority. So for us, the plan is to create a service that offers specialised housing as well as supported housing. Sometimes we have to refuse people that are in desperate need because we don't have the service in place for the complexity of their issues. So we're looking to develop a specialist housing programme, but there is a huge issue with a lack of stock in this borough. So for us, we've seen our move-on rates drop considerably over the last 2 to 3 years, I would say. Does anyone have any questions?
Yep. Thank you for that, Caris. So I will invite members' questions. So we'll start with Councillor Gardner, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can you explain about specialist housing, please?
Absolutely. So at the moment we have a hostel where we have the GP service coming in, drug and alcohol, and it's wraparound support. In our supported housing, it's floating support, so we don't have staff on site all the time. And we're finding a lot of the referrals we have been receiving have complex needs, so drug, alcohol and mental health, all wrapped up together. And unfortunately, although there is this term dual diagnosis, it's not treated as a dual diagnosis. So you will find someone goes to the mental health team and they are told, we can't support you until you deal with your substance issues. The drug and alcohol team will say the same. So this person is then stuck in limbo. So what we would like to do is have supported housing where we have someone living in that could offer support and be around at all times if there's a crisis.
Councillor Garner, do you wish to follow up?
Yeah, I'm intrigued. How often do your clients need CPNs, and are the CPNs available in terms of medication and just sitting and talking to them and things like that?
So at our rough sleeper hostel, it's available every week, twice a week. They come in and are given support. So that service works very well because it's on their doorstep. Where it becomes a challenge is if somebody has a chaotic lifestyle, there's an addiction, and they have an appointment and that's missed. Sometimes they will be taken off that list and then you're going through the whole process again. So outreach work is really important to make this work. So for us at Olympic, it works fantastically well because we've got great relationships with the local services, but that doesn't transfer into our supported housing.
Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just explain the impact that other boroughs putting their residents in housing within Hillingdon affects us, and vice versa? How many people are we having to send out of borough as a result of this?
So we have quite a lot of boroughs contacting us, asking us to take referrals, and our priority is Hillingdon. In our supported housing, although we take referrals from the local authority, we do take self-referrals as well. So we have a lot of outside boroughs contacting us, asking us for support because they are full as well. We do try to prioritise Hillingdon. Unfortunately, if there isn't someone available, a suitable referral, then we will take a referral from someone else. With moving on from accommodation, we do really try and encourage those that are being given an offer of housing, even if it's up north, to accept that, because if they don't, then their case is closed and then they're in a worse off position. But as I said previously, it's really hard to coach someone around making that decision if they've got family, friends in the area, especially if they've got mental health or an addiction. So it happens quite frequently.
Councillor Punja?
I just wanted to kind of understand I know you work very closely with the council, you've said, and I just wanted to kind of understand some of the processes that are involved with working together, so that because this review is about our council's processes and how we can better make them, how we can improve them or support them into improvement, and just what those processes are, where the challenges are faced, and what could we do to kind of support that resident relationship with yourselves and with the council on a better journey.
So we have a fantastic relationship with Hillingdon. We work very closely with some of the housing officers and the rough sleeper team especially. I think the feedback from some of the residents we've housed quite recently has been what is assumed to be a lack of empathy fatigue, I would say. So we have been advocates for some of our residents trying to deal with their housing situation, and I can say that we have experienced some housing officers experiencing fatigue, which is totally understandable. The walk-in rate is huge. Another thing that has become a challenge is the lack of communication. So I think there's been some changes in housing officers recently who have left or been on long-term sick, and their case has not been passed over to another housing officer, which then becomes very frustrating for that referral because they're not having any communication. So I think that is something that we could improve on, and we're happy to be the middleman, the advocate between that relationship. There is almost a fear of professionals for some of the people that we work with. So I think that's why it works so well between Trinity and the council, because we're not seen as the professionals in between. So we will back up what the local authority is saying, and they tends to land better when it comes from us, because it's someone they've built rapport, they've got a relationship with, they trust us. With a housing officer who they speak to very rarely, there's not that opportunity to build that trust up. I think one other thing, my personal experience of the Civic, it's a very unfriendly environment, and I do understand there has to be barriers for safeguarding concerns, and of course there are going to be times where that's necessary, but I don't think it's the best environment for getting the best out of somebody. If you're sitting behind a glass screen, it can feel a bit, this person doesn't want to be near me or want to talk to me. So I think the environment would make a massive difference. We really focus on that at Trinity to make sure that our environment is welcoming and homely, and then people tend to relax a little bit more.
Councillor Punja, do you know?
Just kind of following up on the fear of professionals, actually, because it's something that you hear a lot, especially with mental health. People suffering from mental health, is that the professional is fearful. Also in lots of communities where they have had bad experiences with professionals as well. How do you feel that, and you talk about being the conduit between the council and the residents there, I just wondered what could be put in place, and I understand you say the environment and the team, but that kind of join up between the empathy that brings into the professionals and what could be changed so that or supported, I won't say changed, but supported, that could enable our housing team to be able to offer that, to alleviate that fear in that sense as well, because it can't all then rely on you. The housing officers have to do their job as well, the housing department have to do their job. So how can that be managed?
I think a great starting place would be, you've got housing officers, I'm assuming, on the front line all the time, and that can become quite draining. So I think maybe having a rota where you're not customer facing all the time would allow people to have that rest and recuperation from someone telling their story over and over again, and it can be quite emotional and draining. So I think having a system where they're not front facing all the time would be quite helpful. I think where there's challenging referrals or customers, we would be more than happy to attend appointments with housing officers and the referral to ensure that that relationship is built and trusting. I think the language cannot be helped. It is non-priority need. But when you're homeless and you're in a terrible situation, to be told you're not a priority is actually quite hurtful, is the feedback that we receive. So I think the language is quite important. I understand we need to have the language there, but when we're talking to a customer, maybe we could look at a different language, because to them they are a priority. Their homelessness is a priority. So I think maybe some retraining about a language would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go on to the next question, just an observation on my part. It was raised at the last meeting, the concerns with the handover of casework from officers. That was identified very early in this review, and we appreciate and fully understand the resources are challenging, and which is why there's a greater need to fall back on our systems and technology to ensure that those handovers are fully handed over to the next person taking on that case. And just your observation about the environment of the civic, what would you suggest or recommend in terms of ideas of how we could improve that based on your office layout? What would you suggest in particular we could do about that?
So when I come into the civic, you're met by a security guard instantly, and it's not a very friendly face. I've had experience where I've come from to do referral meetings, and I think they've thought that I'm a client walking in asking for housing, and the reception I got was very unfriendly. And I actually put in a complaint in at the reception the way I was spoken to, because they made an assumption by me walking in that I'm here for housing. So I think that on its own, maybe some retraining of the security, hello, how are you, welcome, nice to meet you, just, the niceties, pleasantries. I know this sounds silly, but plants, make it a bit more of a greener space, more friendly, more open layout, we find works for us. And I think obviously you have to have the rooms with screens for where there's customers that maybe have tendencies of violence before, but I don't think that should be the go-to place for a housing interview, is, to be sat between a glass screen. So I think maybe a family room where you have sofas, you have toys for the children, so while you're talking to the parents, the children can be distracted, because that's another, issue while you're trying to sort out your life and your children are running wild around the civic. So I think a more welcoming, family-friendly environment. And I think just customer service, of a smile on the face and it's a pleasure to meet you, rather than being seen as a problem.
Thank you, Kaz. That's very helpful. And our Civic Centre reception is actually being upgraded as part of our library plans, so I'm sure we can feed that back as part of their changes. Councillor Cawthorne?
Thank you very much. I can quite see why you would perhaps be seen less as the face of officialdom than the local authority, so your feedback, I'm sure, is welcome. My question is really around support to tenants to sustain a tenancy. I imagine that's implicit in what you said. I didn't quite hear it. So I suppose when you're getting vulnerable tenants, perhaps not used to sustaining and managing a tenancy, that can present problems in its own right, and actually getting those things right can go a long way to making sure people don't then leave the accommodation and pitch up elsewhere in the system at a later date, perhaps with greater problems. So is that part of your approach at Trinity, please?
Absolutely. We don't want to be part of the revolving door of homelessness, so it's really important for us that the referrals that we receive are the correct referrals. So unfortunately, sometimes what we find, because we provide floating support out in the community, that we're meeting these people who cannot live independently and should have been referred to supported housing, where they would have had the wraparound support. So I think making sure that they are referred to the correct place in the first place is really important. But for us, it's tenant sustainment, support around mental health, drug and alcohol, living independently. Our turnaround used to be around 2 years someone would move on. We're finding that is increasing, not just because of the cost of move on, but some of the residents that we work with have no life skills at all. So it is starting from scratch, and we don't feel comfortable supporting someone to move on until we know they can live independently. Otherwise, we will just see them again in 6 months' time. Thank you.
Councillor Cawthorne, would you like to have a further question or supplementary?
Not at the moment, thank you.
I've got some councillors who've already asked questions. Do any of the ones who've not asked questions yet wish to ask one? Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you. I noticed there's been an increase in homelessness. Is the increase with adults, or has young people now in the mix?
Both, unfortunately. So we've seen an increase in people being evicted with Section 21s, the no-fault eviction, including families, and a lot of single people that, as Dan was saying earlier, if you're under 35 years old, you're only entitled to a certain a room in a shared house. And what we find is a lot of care leavers have been promised the world that they will be given their own one-bedroom flat. So when we interview them for referral, even though it's clear they have support needs, they won't accept our help because they're saying, I'm going to hold out for a council flat, which is just not how it works anymore. There isn't enough housing. So we have had lots of self-referrals recently for families and for young singles, and especially the NAS discharges. So as soon as they get their status to live in the country, they are given an eviction notice, and sometimes that can be within a week or 2 weeks. So from welcome to the country, you can stay, now you're on the street. It's not very welcoming and can cause quite a lot of disruption and anger. Actually, it's almost re-traumatisation for some of them.
Can I just ask, what about safeguarding if young people are now in the mix? How do you deal with the safeguarding issue, please?
So we have all of our policies and risk assessments. Every person that we house, we will do an individual risk assessment. If they're deemed to be high risk, we will work in pairs, group work, until the risk is no longer. We will work with local services, partnerships, the social services, to make sure they're getting the support that they need. If someone is deemed too high risk, then we can't house them, unfortunately, because we have to think about our staff, but also the other people living in the property.
Councillor Cawthorne, you wish to use your supplementary?
I will, if I may, yes. And I think, Carrie, you might have hinted at this in your previous response, but make sure I've got it right. So we hear a lot, of course, about asylum seekers in hotels. We hear about the Home Office doing their best to get through the process as quickly as they can to move people out of hotels and what have you. Are they showing up in large numbers at the moment or not, or is that something that is to come in terms of compounding existing challenges? So where are we on that? I'm not sure that that's a question for Dan, really, but I'll ask you if I may first, actually.
I mean, in my opinion, it's going to get worse. I think there's a large number living in hotels currently, and as I said, they get their notice and they're asked to move on very quickly, which is adding to the street homeless problem. I see it continuing as is, unfortunately.
Just to echo really what was said then, that we do have high numbers of placements in the borough by the Home Office, and they have an active strategy to accelerate asylum claims, which obviously leads to faster decision making, and a high proportion are single persons, not families. So, and assuming there's no vulnerability or no other underlying need, they will tend to be non-priority need. They can access support, but that's limited for young ones to the under 35 to the single room or shared in a shared facility. So it is a challenging. The Home Office are actively looking to reduce the number of hotels that they've commissioned, and that is moving on at a pace.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, say thank you, Gareth. It's invaluable, the information you're giving this evening. We did hear last month about the issue with the hotels, and we were given some information, if I recall correctly, that there was, as Dan has pointed out, there was an exercise to ensure that rather than sort of the week's notice has been given, that there's more advanced assistance as they are given that transition into being given leave to remain, as I understand it. I wanted to come back to the empathy factor. As councillors, and I'm sure many of us around here will have heard testimony from residents that have experienced just that. So I'm very glad to hear, in a perverse way, that is coming across from you, and that's the same testimony that you're giving to the committee this evening. But you did mention about having a rota for housing officers, and this is coming on to a second question to Dan, which is about turnover of staff. But it's also about what other measures do you think could be recommended, because as a staff experiencing hour after hour, day after day, week after week, horrible stories of people's situations, the impact on their mental health, which I would assume has played a factor into the turnover of staff in the housing team. What you could recommend beyond a rota that might assist council staff in housing? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, at Trinity, we take well-being of our staff really important. We deal with some very complex cases, and as you were saying, that can have a personal impact on mental health. We hire a lot of people with lived experience, and sometimes that can bring up some old emotions. So well-being is really important for us. So our team meets weekly, every Friday morning. We block out 3 hours, and it's a time for the team to catch up, but also to get support from their team members if there's a difficult resident, if they've had a challenging situation, so they have their peer support around them, or I've had something similar, here's what I would do, and just a chance to offload on a difficult challenge that they've faced. And we offer flexi working hours as well. So if someone is clearly fatigued, is getting run down, we will almost enforce how you need to take some time off, have a few early finishes to ensure that they are getting the respite that they need. And then we also do double up working. So if there's a particularly challenging house, if we're experiencing antisocial behaviour, we will make sure that that person always has somebody else with them, so that they've got the chance to offload and feel supported throughout that journey. I think we try and encourage everyone to have annual leave every 3 months to make sure that they are having consistent rest time and they come back refreshed. With the way that we work, we hire very passionate people, and they would work, every day of the year if you would allow that. But it's so important for people to have that rest and go and be with their families and put their feet up for a week or so. So yeah, we ensure that we keep an eye on annual leave, and if someone hasn't booked it for a few months, we'll give them a gentle nudge to remind them that they need to take some time. So wellbeing days, away days, we do a lot of as well.
Councillor Bowley.
Thank you, Chair. This question to Dan. I think it was mentioned at the last committee about exit interviews from housing. What we weren't able to touch on that occasion was the sort of any themes that were coming out of housing, to try and get an understanding about what people are saying about reasons for them unfortunately leaving the staff, and if there's any common threads that we are now aware of that we're actively trying to tackle.
Thank you. I mean, a common theme is from officers, case officers, is not having ready solutions to meet the housing need, because when in the example that Karis gave us, a sort of no fault eviction, section 21 from private sector accommodation, the only real solution is alternative accommodation. You can try and negotiate with the landlord, and so therefore it can become a sort of defeating conversation when you haven't got an offer, an alternative, and particularly as the in everyday language, the clock is counting down to the eviction day or the bailiff warrant day. That can be quite challenging. So I think one of the areas that we're really trying to work hard to increase is the supply of accommodation. We know that Cabinet have increased the budget for acquiring properties to 300 this year, 500 over the next 3 years. But a key part of our strategy has to be securing private rented accommodation, affordable, but it's proving very challenging. I mean, even trying to secure a 3-bed family-sized property in the Uxbridge area, initial quotes are it's going to cost £3,000 a month, and typically local housing allowance will be about £1,400, even at the uplifted rates from this month. So even on that example, and we negotiate. We don't just take the first offer we receive, but you're looking at quite a significant subsidy just to secure that property. But every property is negotiation, property by property. So anyway, I think the key plank of success here for both resolving homelessness and relieving the pressure is strong prevention, early intervention, but it's also a healthy supply of affordable housing. And so that when officers are going and they're doing their very best to try to prevent homelessness and being proactive, but sometimes you cannot negotiate or mediate with either family or the landlord, then you have to find an alternative offer, and that will relieve the problem, the challenge, rather than see it count down into temporary accommodation or something else that may not be ideal. So and the significance of that is that if you can get a quick resolution to a presenting challenge, homelessness challenge, then you start to relieve caseload pressures quite quickly as well, because you can then close down cases quite quickly. So that is a key part of the strategy, and it's very similar to Caris and Trinity, is that we've invested more resource where we needed to. We've had, we've created a wellbeing room for staff as well, sort of breakout space, and strengthening casework support supervision. So that's something that actually just last week we were talking about how we can step that up. And we've got a service planning event with managers tomorrow, where we can actually start to put this into practice and review how we're doing. We've held, certainly over the last 6 months, a lot of staff engagement events as well, celebrating success, talking about the challenges, and making sure that there's support available. But I won't pretend, we've got it cracked and it's perfect yet. We've got still a lot more to do. And we need to strengthen. One of the challenges is trying to recruit and retain staff. So we've got more vacancies, albeit covered by agency staff, but more vacancies than I would like. And so a key part of our priority plan over the coming 12 months is a workforce planning and development, and recruiting staff who have really, may not have the experience of, say, housing, but have really strong experience of customer care and empathy, and wanting to find solutions and being tenacious to some of the challenges that those who are facing homelessness or threatened by homelessness face.
Thank you. Councillor Punja.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Fari has asked and gone back on the mental health that we discussed last meeting, and has reiterated that today because it was a concern that we had in the last meeting about the mental health of our staff. But following on from that, Dan, I think what we're talking about is a perfect storm at the moment, aren't we? Sadly, and we did discuss at the last meeting about the fact that, yes, we understand that there's a reliance on affordable private rented accommodation. However, that's what got us into this mess in the first place, and so we're going back into the same field. So one of the things that I was interested in here is when you talked about lack of communication and how that communication needs to be addressed. And last meeting I brought up the charter for a rental accommodation charter, but in that would be that communication skill, because basically we have a lot of residents who are told that there's going to be a meeting on a certain day. That meeting doesn't happen. They're told that they're going to get a letter on a certain day, or they're going to get a response by a certain day. That doesn't happen. It doesn't get followed up. The residents are then chasing on and chasing on. It becomes a vicious cycle in which you get a very frustrated resident who then becomes very frustrated at the officer, who is equally frustrated because they're picking up maybe casework that they might not have seen before or whatever, and it just keeps going round and round in circles. So that communication is going to be vital, I assume, in this key, and I just want you to know how we're addressing that communication.
Thank you. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning is a workshop actually with our head of contact centre, basically, sort of customer experience, Lou Forster, working with the management team across the homeless housing needs service, and we are starting with the customer experience, because you're absolutely right. There's too many calls coming in, chasing for callbacks, and so Some of it is, and I absolutely understand it, which is absolutely quite right, that residents are following up because they're concerned about there isn't a solution yet to their homeless threat. Others they're waiting for an update. The officer hasn't been able to get back, and therefore, it's the old adage, isn't it? Even if you've got nothing to say, still tell them you're on it and you're working through it, which helps to reduce some of the calls that are coming into the contact centre. So they're working through, and we've done a lot of work to actually analyse and understand why it is that residents are contacting us, and therefore be proactive. So we're thinking about, for example, maybe once a week, case officers provide a communication and update to everyone who's on their caseload to say, we haven't forgotten about you, and structure it around the personal housing plan. We're still working on these things. I've had some success this week, but something that just keeps that relationship and that communication moving. And so it helps to reassure residents that whilst we are continuing to support them and find solutions, as part of that partnership around the personal housing plan, actually we also need you to keep looking and trying to find solutions where possible, residents, to resolve your own homeless situation or threat of homelessness. So completely agree. We have not got this perfect, Councillor Bunja. We recognise it, and there's action that we will be putting in place, some very tactical plans and strategies which will change the way we communicate, engage, and actually just the relationship we have with our customers, our residents.
Anything further, Councillor Bunja? Councillor Gardner?
I'm glad that you spoke about the lack of empathy, and also the people are a bit freaked out by so-called professionals. They actually, a lot of the clients come to see us because they don't regard us as being professionals. But what I'm hearing from people, and I don't know whether you can clarify that or not, that not only are the staff rude, but they're also judgmental. Okay, so if somebody comes in with an assortment of problems and they're heavy duty and some of them get very, very upset, they're basically told to F off. Sorry, get your act together. It's difficult for councillors to intervene because the housing staff disregard us completely, and what you say about the security is spot on. I mean, I was thinking about training, that in terms of different people with different problems, I mean, my speciality is but it's domestic abuse. But sometimes the people that I deal with have come in, and of course they're worried, they're upset, lots of things going on, and it's like, from the staff members, they pull yourself together. This is stupid. I would like training to involve people, the client group that you have, to actually sit down and say, even if they don't want to do it face to face, even like a recording of how it feels to be them, so that then, I mean, okay, some housing officers probably have got life experience, so lots of different things going on, but some of them haven't got a clue, which that's where, as councillors, we're coming from, because it's the lack of empathy, and also people being judgmental. I mean, I was a victim of domestic violence. I didn't ask for it, but it's that sort of thing here. Well, why did you get yourself in that situation? One of my victims was told. And this is a woman who had 2 or 3 children. I mean, that's where... Well, do you agree with me about that? But the way that they are judgmental. And no disrespect to you, Dan, because we've had this conversation many times. But it's like, unless they understand the problems and the reality of what people are going through, then they're not going to be able to help. It's a bit like, well, we finished with you, get on to the next one. And it's I don't know, I suppose it's about the client group being respected for what they're going through.
I can't talk about all the housing officers. I don't know them all, and it'd be unfair. I totally take your point, and have experienced, a lot of residents have experienced that. I think the advantage Trinity have is, as I said, we hire a lot of people with lived experience, so there is no judgment. We also, if someone doesn't have lived experience, we spend a lot of time training. There's no judgment. You can't treat someone in a particular way because they're addicted to drugs. You don't know their story. You don't know why they've ended up in that position. So what we do at Trinity is every year we send a survey out to all of our residents and ex-residents, asking for feedback about their experience, about anything that we can improve on. And with that feedback, we will hold training sessions. So the resident or ex-resident will give us feedback on how their journey or experience could have been improved with us. And then we will take that and we will implement that into our systems to ensure that everyone is being treated fairly and with respect, no matter where they come from or what their story is. So I think what you're doing here is fantastic, because you're getting the feedback that you need to do to make the changes that are positive for the borough and for your residents. I'm not sure training-wise what that would look like, because there are so many different needs where somebody may become homeless. But I'm not sure how you hire, but lived experience is a great way to go. For me personally, it works extremely well at Trinity.
Anything further, Councillor Gardner? Okay. Any other questions at all? Okay. Caris, thank you very much for your attendance this evening. And Dan, thank you for answering the questions as well. There's always one. Councillor Farley, go on.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually a question for you, Chair, or possibly Mark. On page 21, the witness session 4 that's to come, we might want to say this offline, I don't know, but the witness session for the social prescribers, I had provided contact information for local social prescribers, and I'm not sure why we've ended up with Camden down here. That may be because the people locally have decided not to take part, but I wanted to get some clarification on that, please.
Thank you. I'll take it up with Liz outside of the meeting. I'm sure there's a reason as to why, but we'll get to the bottom of that and find out. Okay, guys, thank you for your attendance finally. You may leave if you wish to do so, and thank you again. We now move on to our next item, which is the weed control on pages 13 to 94. Don't be that quick. As per our previous way of doing things, there'll be no presentation from officers, as this isn't a budget item or a review, so we will go straight to questions from members, please. Are there any questions from members on the weed control item? Councillor Bundy, you're shaking your head. Is that a yes or no?
I didn't realise that the matter of closing, we hadn't gone on to the strategy review here. That was part of the schedule. We were going to have 2 presentations.
Unfortunately, Benjamin, who was meant to be here this evening, hasn't shown, so unfortunately we'll have to relook at the work programme and get him back on. If you wish to add anything further, you're more than welcome to do so. But yeah, they've gone. So the recommendations you'll see on the report is for noting the witness review session, which we've just done. Unfortunately, as I said, Benjamin wasn't able to attend. If you wish to add anything further, by all means, we can take it offline outside the meeting. Okay. Okay, so our weed item report. Any questions? Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm serving normally on this committee, Stuart, but obviously, as a ward councillor, I've been as conscious as anyone of the challenges over the last year, and there really have been some challenges. And whilst I can see that we've set out in some detail here sort of how we're moving it forward, I suppose the question for me is what confidence can we have that we've learnt the lessons we need to from the experiences of last year, to pass it on to our residents. So I'll be just interested in your comments on that, Stuart, please. Thank you.
So the contractor had some staffing challenges, some machinery challenges. We also had a very, very challenging year of weather, which has started again this year with the rain, warm weather and everything like that. They've put organisational change in with extra staff, extra machines, backup machines that are available should things fail as well. So the third application last year went very well, and we're starting off this year with good hope, and the contractor has put the things in place to achieve a better performance this year. That being said, they were due to start on Monday, and it's rained and been windy ever since. And unfortunately with glyphosate, you cannot put it down in the rain. because it just washes away into the gutters, and if it's windy, the fear of drift and spray drift is too great. So weather challenges will always be there, but we're very confident that the business have put things in place. They know the consequence of the challenge, and we're sure that they will be much more successful this year.
Councillor Corfield.
Quick supplementary, if I may. Thank you, Stuart. So from that I'm taking it, it's the same organisation involved with some organisational change and some necessary next steps. I mean, just from a council taxpayer's value for money perspective, if they're defaulting on aspects of what they're doing, presumably we have recourse for redress there, have we, in some shape or form? Is that right, as part of the contract?
Yes, we do. If they fail completely, then we could restrict payment or part payment. So those things are written into the contract. There is a mechanism for them to improve, which they did last year, and we were confident that they achieved that. And they brought in additional staff above and beyond the contract price to make sure that they got back to where we needed to be to start this year. So yes.
Any other questions? Councillor Punjab?
Thank you, Stuart. Stuart, I was doing a bit of research on glyphosate, and I just wanted to ask about any knowledge that we have regarding why the EU has banned the licensing from December 23, and why the UK has carried that on until December 25, and what happens post December 25, because when I was reading into the reasons why it was banned, it's a little bit alarming because of the fact that it was industrial lobbyists that were doing all the research into its safety, and especially safety for human beings, rather than independent research and independent studies that were around it. So I don't know whether that has been I know it's been licensed in the UK, so this is a licensing issue as well, but what happens with that licensing issue, because obviously we are public servants who are putting this into our lives. We're not a private company, so I just kind of wanted a little bit of reassurance around that.
Yeah, so it's been approved until December 2025. After that, who knows? There's a lot of research being done by the Amenity Forum, which is separate from the organisations that are producing these chemicals. So there's a lot of research in that. There's a lot of scaremongering certainly come out of the United States about glyphosate and its problems. If glyphosate is banned in 2025 for whatever reason, then we will need to accept weeds, pretty much, in the footway, because the other alternatives don't stack up, both environmentally, through use of water, use of fuel, and labour time. So they're our options going forward, really. There is much confidence that glyphosate will be licensed again.
Any other questions? No. Sorry, go on, Stuart.
If I could do, and we're putting much less on than an awful lot of other authorities. You know, our contractor uses the most state-of-the-art machine that only sprays glyphosate on a weed if it is present. So that blanket spraying and everything like that is limited. So no weeds, no glyphosate goes on the ground.
Councillor Bunja.
Yes, thank you, because we did come out with you last year to come and have a look at how that was put together and the machinery that was used, and we looked at add-on things for the machinery as well. I was just concerned about the licensing, because it just is a little bit of worry for what you've read about the product, and I'm just then going to ask that in terms of modern technology and everything, there must be other products that are coming out that are similar, and because that's just the nature of R&D. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. As I say, we as a local authority, we're not conducting that research ourselves. We're relying on groups like the Amenity Forum, the London Parks and green space for them as well. So we're getting all that intel. We will be guided by that.
Stuart, if I could just ask about the performance failure we had last year with the contractor, do you feel there was any lessons learned from a council perspective in terms of checks and balances, and what have we learned from last year and what are we doing differently this year to ensure that we don't have a repeat situation?
Yeah, I think it was a very unfortunate set of circumstances around individual involved in the contract and everything like that, who was making assurances both to us and to their own employers. That got sorted. We are checking much more on their performance to make sure that they are achieving what they should be achieving. So yes, there are more checks and balances going to be in place going forward. We were over-reliant on the contractor's good performance in prior years, and we're getting an awful lot of assurances that proved to be unfortunately false.
And also, from memory, we brought the service sort of partially back in-house because of that failure on their part. What about that? Is that something you've built into your sort of business model going forward? If it was to fail again, have you now got a sort of continuity plan in place in-house if it was to happen again? Hopefully it don't, but it's just as a backup.
Yes, we have. We've got agency staff that we can call on as well to do that weeding manually. We've also got more trained people with a PA1, PA6 licence to spray weeds as well. So we have that backup. Obviously work very closely with Nicola as well in the waste team their guys were doing some as well. But we're fairly confident that the contractor won't fail in that way again.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner?
It's not a question actually, it's a comment. Basically I use apple cider vinegar to get rid of weeds. Most of this I can't read. I don't know whether Cardiff, that people have got really good eyes, but no, I don't. There's like 100 pages. A lot of them makes no sense.
No sense in its content, or you
I can't see it.
Okay.
Can't read it.
I can let you have it electronically.
No, it's all right, thanks. I'd make a comment.
Maybe try electronically. You can zoom in. Okay. Any other questions? No? Stuart, thank you very much for that that answer session. That's very informative. Item 7 is the Food Waste Success Scheme. My tongue tied. Pages 95 to 106. Nicola, thank you very much for your patience. As with Stuart's one, we won't be having a presentation from yourself. We'll go straight to questions. So we'll start with Councillor Gardner, please. Microphone, please. Thank you.
On a couple of things, actually. On where it says targeted engagement, page 107, yeah. What areas was were the door knocking days? What areas in the borough?
It was arranged across the borough. Most were focused in the south. I believe it was the Botwell area, but I would have data on it that I could share with you later on. It was done as a trial based off of crew feedback of where they had kind of lower tonnages at the end of the day, and they'd noticed that less properties were participating. And also, the way that we work, we have 5 collection rounds. Obviously, they work from north to south of the borough. On Thursday and Friday, we actually put out one less food waste vehicle at the moment because there is a lower participation in those areas. So we wanted to focus that targeted work in the areas we're collecting on a Thursday and a Friday, so that we have the capacity and the teams of the vehicles to pick up the extra waste that we would hopefully be putting into the food waste stream.
Thank you. Can I
Yeah, sure.
On the food waste from flats, what developments, they said 5, took part in the trial to collect food waste? Do you know which ones?
Off the top of my head I don't, but again I could get that for you very quickly.
Councillor Cawthorne?
Thank you. Yes, 4 years ago, this was one of my responsibilities in my final cabinet role. So, a little bit close to my heart. And we were certainly pushing food waste recycling then. I just want to be clear on the participation rates now. Certainly, it was probably in the high teens, I suppose. It was getting to the point at which it was commercially viable to us to collect separately. I'm just looking at some of these figures here. Make sure I've got them right, because where we've done targeted engagement, I'm seeing 60% on page 107. Am I reading that right? Am I looking at something does that apply to something else?
Yeah, so what that applies to is of the nearly 5,000 properties that we targeted, before we did that exercise, 20% of those properties were registered for the service, and at the end of that, 60% were.
Okay, thank you. May I just a supplementary, and I suppose it's linking to Janet's question, because flats have been a bugbear for a very long time, and we know that because of the way they're configured, as well as other problems. I just wonder how well it's actually working in practice, because I suppose there's a difference between being registered and actually using a system that works well. Thank you. So we monitor our participation by the number of properties that have registered. And that's true that doesn't necessarily mean they've registered and they're using it. So we also then monitor the tonnage that we're collecting. And on a weekly basis, we're looking at kind of 16-17% higher than what we were collecting last year. And in terms of overall tonnage collected each year, again, it's kind of up by 200-300 tonnes each year. So we know that they're participating more, but there's no guarantee that every property is participating every week to the fullest level. So our targets are more holistic in terms of the cost reduction of the higher tonnage of food waste that we can collect, and also the reduction of the amount of food waste that is visible in our general waste, because of course that's where the highest cost is. So it's a sort of a three-way monitoring.
Thank you. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you. I know in the past the council's done green roadshows, or whatever they call them, where they go to like supermarkets and like busy places and whatnot. And I think I like to think anyway that that's kind of led to an uplift in people taking these caddies home if it's right in front of them. Is that planning to continue?
Yeah, absolutely. So the recycling team were introduced in 2020 towards the end of the year. So those roadshows started in 2021 and they've continued every year and will continue again this year. So I think last year they did 19 events and 240 new food waste sign-ups came about because of those events.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to flats again. It says in the report that 137 units have been installed. Could you let the committee know, because I certainly don't know what these things look like, what the storage facility looks like. Are they with the other bins in the communal bin area? What do they look like? How is the waste put into the bins?
So it's done on a case-by-case basis, and the officer will go out and survey the site before we decide what we're going to implement. What we've focused on with these potentially up to 600 units, although we're trying to reduce that as much as possible because they're quite expensive. So where we can offer the curbside service and the individual caddy, we will. But where a flatted property has communal bins for waste and recycling, if space already existed, then we've put the food waste unit next to it. What it is, it's called a housing unit. It's got a kind of wheelie bin that you would get for a general waste collection on wheels with the lid about 240 litres. That goes inside. The housing unit sits slightly larger than that, and then there's a pedal to operate a lifting mechanism at the top of the unit. The food waste goes in there, and the resident never has to touch it, because one of the main feedback points was that the residents find it dirty. It's not my food waste, it's in there. It means that you don't have to clean the bins as often. And I can certainly share some pictures with you, or let you know a location that they're at as well.
Follow up?
Yeah, that'd be great, Chair. If we can get some visual imagery on that, that would be good. Just also for clarity with the actual waste disposal, if you've had your Sunday dinner and you're chucking your waste out and your bin collection's not till Friday, I'm thinking odour, smells, rotting, vermin, the security of the bin store, but also ensuring that where people are living, in a flat and the bin store's below them or next to their kitchen window or whatever it might be, so I'm sure this has been looked into, but for reassurance that if people, the residents are going to have these things in stores, that they're not going to sort of suffer bad smells as the week goes by in the heat of summer.
Yeah, so based off of our trial properties, there wasn't any feedback about poor odours. The purpose of the housing unit is to protect that, and it also means that you don't have to clean the housing unit as often. You can take the wheelie bin away, you can put another one in, and that's drastically cheaper. I think a housing unit sits at about £500, a wheelie bin sits at about £20. So you can take that away, you can clean the wheelie bin somewhere else, you can put it back into circulation. We also have in the service the street cleansing team work very closely with us, and they've got jet washing capabilities, so we can do that if there was a report of a spillage down the side of the bin or something. We, where possible, always place the food waste bin at least 6 metres from the property boundary as well, and that's also for fire risk. We tend to fill bins. So no, to date we haven't had that issue. Where at the moment we've installed them on our own sites, we've got that ability to do that with kind of our caretaking staff that are there as well. Once we start to introduce them to kind of private sector housing, that challenge may come about a bit more often because we haven't got that control. But as with their waste and recycling bins, the managing agent is asked to ensure that they're kept clean.
Nicola, if I could just ask a question on the actual individual food caddies. It's around, so you're doing the door knocking recruitment, which is great, and the numbers are really impressive. What's your projected numbers going forward? Do you have any targets for what you want to reach across the borough in the coming year or two? And do you have sufficient stock? I assume you're storing a lot of these bins already, but how would you order those stock? Do you do them on a big batch basis, or to ensure you're getting the best value for money from the purchase and the buying power?
So our target for growth is additional 20,000 properties to be participating by the end of this financial year, and that's the investment with the door knocking officers. There's legislation changes coming in that require the borough to provide a food waste service, not just to offer it to all properties by March 2026. So at the end of the door knocking service, anybody who said, no, I don't want to participate, we will be still required to give them that. And we're hoping that the new burden and funding coming through from DEFRA will support that one. In terms of stock, yes, we haven't got enough space to hold 20,000 caddies at the depot site where we store them. So we do a regular order of about every 3 months, and that's done on kind of a 3 quotes basis each time. That we used to have a preferred supplier, but one particular company kind of took hold of a lot of the market share. They bought up a lot of the companies that were supplying the caddies. And that left more challenge in terms of cost, so we do continuously go out and kind of benchmark where the best price for those is. And there was a period of time at the end of last year, of being honest, that we weren't able to get stock easily, and so that benchmarking was happening more regularly, and we closely monitored to see if there was any complaints during that time to help us to get an idea of a trial basis, and there wasn't, so we've now got a stock of quite a few suppliers that we know will provide us with a reliable caddy.
Thank you. And my follow-up really was in regards to the provision of bags. So I believe we're changing it now. We're going to provide them once a year to residents. Does that apply to food waste bags? And if so, are you confident that the product or the bag itself is sufficient to last that long? Because they are biodegradable, and I've noticed at times when I've looked in the bottom of the kitchen sink, it's like confetti, more or less. But does that need reviewing, or do you think it's sufficient?
So we are providing the automatic delivery once a year, and that sign-up started at the beginning of April. But we are limiting, so the maximum number of food waste line rolls that we will deliver to any property is 2. And again, that's firstly because the caddy size wouldn't really take more than 2 or maximum 3 bags if you were filling them properly or fully. But also because of the biodegradable element of them and the fact they'll break down. We don't want people storing excess bags and then complaining they didn't work and having to reorder them. However, residents can still access those bags by going online and ordering them, or going to the library and collecting them.
Thank you. Councillor Cawthorne?
Thank you. I think Nicola's just answered one question that posed in my head from what you said. You were talking about getting them manually, Chairman, but I think you can still collect in libraries moving forward, so thanks for that. My question actually was, again, going back to the Cabinet role, one of the key things for me was the idea that putting food waste into landfill actually puts methane into the atmosphere. Absolutely critical message. Can we take it that that's sort of front and centre of the comms that we are putting out as part of the outreach work? Because I would have thought that's a key message.
It is important. However, we don't landfill our general waste. It all goes for energy from waste, and then that's fed back into the grid as well. So food waste has got a higher carbon content because of how resource intensive it is to produce, and all of the different processes that it goes through, including all the packaging that's added to it. So it is, when you're putting a scale in, it is really bad for the environment. However, we've moved along to the point that methane escaping into the environment isn't happening on such a great scale because we're doing better things with the waste that we're collecting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bunja?
Thank you. I just wanted to go around the financial implications of this because, and this is genuine kind of questions of things that I just thought that came to my head. So I see that this is based around a cost-saving exercise at this moment in time, which is, fantastic because reducing it down to £12 per tonne is quite a considerable saving. And so what I was just wondering was that if this company, in Mitcham, the anaerobic digestion facility in Mitcham, we're paying them to digest our waste and to create it into biogases and or bioenergy and sell that onto the grid, or it then the fertilising product out of that comes out of that which you can't sell on, which obviously is not into energy, will then go into local farms. What do Hillingdon get out of that? Because we don't. How do we benefit? Is the company benefiting, or are we actually getting anything more than the cost reduction of our waste disposal?
Yeah, it is the cost reduction of the waste disposal, and it's all of the added benefits that they're getting by being able to sell that onto the national grid is why they're able to do it for such a lower price than they would through processing it in a different way. And
so I noted that you said that the garden waste was done locally, and does that so it's a bit of a two-pronged question actually. So because I've noticed that there is dry anaerobic digestion facilities in the country that actually do garden waste and food waste and do exactly, and then do exactly the same thing. Why is it that we do that separately rather than doing that together? Because would that mean that we would be able to reduce the cost even further, or does this facility not provide dry anaerobic digestion?
So the facility that we use doesn't provide that option. The contract and the kind of decision and tender for that service was done by the West London Waste Authority, and that's so that we can do it in an economy of scale of the 6 boroughs going together. So I don't have the details of what they were considering at the time, but I could definitely ask them for some feedback on that.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a general sort of question. Has the recycling of food waste replaced the garden compost? Because gardeners, because I know in Australia, I read that most food and garden waste in Australia comes from homes. I just wondered what it's just a general question.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know. I know that we still compost huge amounts of material at the Harefield site, more so than any of the other West London boroughs because of the free garden waste service. I haven't been aware of or seen any kind of peer reports or anything that we're having a lack of compost because of it.
Any other questions? Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. The food waste from businesses, the trial that was done, what were the nature of the businesses that you trialled with? I'm just curious as to whether this was just businesses or you were targeting specifically, fast food outlets, restaurants.
I believe it was a hotel and cash and carries, so they did have large amounts of food waste being produced. The reason we did it on a small scale was firstly because we wanted people that had come to us to ask if we could provide the service, and we decided we've had a few, let's trial it. And because you need to use the compostable bags or no bag at all, you can put it in loose in order to recycle. Lots of businesses, if you're in a busy kitchen or if you're selling or recycling stock that's gone off, it's all in packaging. And so it was a real concern for us that it would be a cheap way for those businesses to get rid of their food waste and not depackage, and then we would kind of bear the brunt of the cost of that at the end of the process. So we had some lessons learned from that, and we know now that with the right education and the right comms behind it, the businesses can do that. And there's also a very firm arm in the contract then that you must comply with this, we'll monitor it and feedback. So.
And with that then, if you say high producing food waste establishments, would that necessitate an increase in collections, or you still anticipate it being the same as residential?
We co-collect our food waste with businesses, schools, flats and residential properties. So with the kind of area of the borough and how close everything is, unless we had a substantial growth, then no, I don't think it would affect us having to buy more vehicles very quickly to accommodate that.
So, misunderstanding. What I'm saying is that the establishment or establishments are producing a lot of food waste on a day-by-day basis, of course, for a household. So would you foresee increased collection days occurring, so every couple of days, rather than maybe once a week as you would for a household? Sorry, that's what I was getting.
Yeah, so we offer flexible collections to all of the businesses, and it would be a case of if there's a business that's in Harefield and we're operating in the south of the borough on that day, then we may not be able to offer it, and so we deal with it on a case-by-case basis. We can always offer once a week, and then we'll look at the total value of the contract to see is it worthwhile us redirecting a vehicle to a different part of the borough in order to win the wider business.
I will invite any other questions before I do. If there's not, you can finish off with the question. Okay, off you go, Rick.
So, I'm just also thinking about the implications for health and safety, and again, if you're dealing with food establishments. I don't know necessarily how a fish and chip shop gets rid of its waste on a regular basis, or a hotel in terms of food waste, but I'm just thinking if you're having a place which is, again, you say about the security of it, but again, it's a distinction between what is a household or communal bin versus what you're having outside the back alleyway, where unfortunately in a lot of high streets and things, we've got a lot of vermin and rats and things that unfortunately are thereabouts. It's then, if there's any sort of possible impact, and making sure that they're taking up the service, which is great, but then any repercussions that may exist if waste isn't being collected on that scale in a timely manner.
Yeah, so the containers that we provide would be vermin-proof. They do have lids, they are secure, and the food waste wouldn't be composting or decomposing to that level within a week normally for most businesses. And it is a commercial kind of collection. There are private contractors that if the business needs more than we can offer, they're not bound to use us. So as much as we always try to win that business, if it's not commercially viable for us, they would still have the requirement that they needed to find that through the private sector. And then any one that wasn't complying with that would be followed up by one of our enforcement teams, and that would be checked and reported back that way.
Nicola, thank you very much for your attendance this evening and answering the questions from the members. It's very much appreciated, and your answers are very informative. We move now on to the forward plan, pages 107 to 818. Is everyone agreed? That's noted. Thank you. And item 9 is the work programme, pages 119 to 122. Any questions or comments? I can see none. So, okay, we'll note that as well. That concludes the business for this evening. Thank you very much for your attendance, everyone, and I declare the meeting closed at 8:15.